So we're carrying on a series looking through the Gospel of Matthew, and particularly looking at where Jesus meets people and there's this I see you moment where I see something in you that other people don't see, and we're going to see Jesus in ways that we have not possibly seen Jesus. So if you've got a Bible with you, if you want to turn to Matthew 8, I'm going to read the verses out anyway. It says this: when Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." Jesus ran, "Man, I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately, he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." It's been poxy weather the past few days, hasn't it? Horrible. And it's nice to be inside, isn't it? It's nice to be inside, out of the rain, in the dry. And it's nice to be inside when the weather's bad, but it's nice to be inside in all sorts of things. Like, it's nice to be on the in crowd, isn't it? Have you ever gone to a place where you don't know anyone? It might be your first time here and you feel a little bit kind of on the outside. And you feel like everyone knows everyone else, but you're on the outside. Actually, today what's going to happen is I'm going to talk about this geezer who had leprosy, who knew entirely what it was to be on the outside. Now this is kind of a new concept for us, this being sort of we've come up with a whole new vocabulary with the coronavirus stuff. Like, so we've got, like, we know about social distancing and self-isolation and all this stuff that we didn't really even consider too much before. And now there's this whole kind of paraphernalia and face masks and all this nonsense because of this sickness. Back in the day, leprosy was a big one, okay? And when we're talking about leprosy in the Bible, often it talks about various skin diseases and you know, all sorts of things to do with skin. But this guy, particularly today, he's got the bad one, like what we know now as Hansen's disease. Apparently Hansen's disease, it's like a bacteria that grows on the body and attacks the nerve endings, and so what happens is you lose all sort of feeling, and it means you get injuries and infections on the extremities of your body, which leads to kind of limbs and fingers and noses and things sort of basically wasting away and falling off. In Luke's account of this same thing, it says that this guy was full of leprosy. He was absolutely covered in leprosy. And what happened was, when a guy back in the day had this type of leprosy, he was completely ostracised. He was completely outside. He was in the worst kind. Let me read in Leviticus. It says in Leviticus, these are the rules for anyone who has leprosy. It says, Leviticus 13 says, anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. This disease was not only like dangerous physically, but it was considered a curse from God. This is what one commentator said about it. He says, its main features were the appearance of a bright spot on the flesh, whiter than the rest, spreading, inflaming, cracking, an itcherous humour oozing from the cracks, the skin becoming hard, scaly, as white as snow. One so affected was regarded as unclean. His touch brought defilement. He was looked upon as smitten with a divine plague. He had to live apart from his fellows, to wear on his brow the outward sign of separation, to cry out the words of warning, "Unclean, unclean." This guy lived like this, we can only assume, for a number of years. This disease had racked his body, and not only did he have the physical kind of disfigurement and disabilities brought by it, but it also brought this sense of cursed by God, unclean, having to remain separate from any type of kind of fellowship at all. And it's this guy that approaches Jesus, and he says this, he says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. You see, it wasn't the healing necessarily that he was after. He wanted to be made clean. He wanted the defilement to be taken away from him. This guy was a literal, total outcast. He had to go around with torn clothes and hair unkempt. He had to wear a face mask, people. Okay? He had to be absolutely removed from society. And just to take this story, if you can imagine the picture, like he was in a place where wherever Jesus was, there was crowds of people. He's just come down the mountain. Fraser was preaching last week about the Sermon on the Mount. He's come down from the mountain. Thousands of people were listening and hanging on his every word. Wherever Jesus was 2,000 years ago, there was a crowd of people around him. This leper turned up, and you can imagine him going, we can't, this leper approached Jesus, and he says, look, you can make me clean. And it says that Jesus reached out and touched him. Listen, he didn't have to do that. Jesus didn't have to touch him. We'll read in a few verses that he says, like, to the centurion, he just say the word, and the servant of the centurion was healed. Okay, he was completely healed. Jesus didn't have to touch him, but he did. He chose to put himself. Like, the leper wouldn't ask him to touch him because he knew not only would he kind of put Jesus at risk from the disease, but Jesus himself would be considered defiled and unclean. He would no longer be allowed in to worship at the temple. But when darkness and disease and defilement and disfigurement come in contact with the living God, it doesn't affect him, he affects it. And it says that this man was cleaned immediately. And I mean, I would just love to see the look on people's faces as they saw literal fingers growing back and kind of skin becoming brand new, and no one was more shocked than this guy. And Jesus said to him, listen, this is provocative, and this is what I want to get into this morning. He says, I want you to go and show yourself to the priest. I want you, the unclean outsider, to go to the temple, the place where you're shut out from, and I want you to show them what the Lord has done and offer the appropriate sacrifice to show that you've been cleansed. And I think it's very significant that Jesus says this. So this leper had to go back to the temple, the place where you were meant to worship. You were meant to come into the presence of God. Where you was an outsider, but you had to come into the presence of God. And I'll be honest with you, when you look up leprosy and the sacrifices that you had to make if someone had leprosy to be cleansed, man, it is complicated. Like, seriously complicated. And I think it's deliberately so, because this type of leprosy, nobody ever got healed from. You get this is a death sentence. You are forever. You've got this for life. You don't get healed from this sort of stuff. So you can imagine him kind of coming into the temple, and the priests having to get the reference books down and going, oh, well, now, what is this about this one? Because this is a complicated one. And when you read about it, there's got all this stuff. You've got all this intricate symbolic ceremony that involves shaving your hair, washing. You've got to get this lump of cedar wood. You've got to get this branch of a hyssop. You've got to get this scarlet yarn, and you tie it all together. You hand it over clean water. You get 2 clean birds, right? One of them you kill and drip the blood onto the wood and onto the water. The other one you set free. Then you get this blood, you put it on the right earlobe. Then you put it on the right thumb. Then you put it on the right toe. After this, you get oil, you put it on the right earlobe, the right thumb, the right... It sounds like some kind of weird Masonic kind of initiation, doesn't it? It's so complicated. But then you unpick it, and you see what Jesus is doing. When you realise who it is that sent them into the middle of the temple and said, right, do this ceremony as a testimony to the priests, not just to everyone, to the priests. Let the priests know this. You see that the blood is kind of, it symbolises cleansing. It's like these two clean birds. One of them is killed, one of them bleeds, one of them is let free. And you see that the cedar wood, it symbolises kind of, it's the king of trees, but also it symbolises this lump of wood, this sacrificial lump of wood is there, and the hyssop plant. And you remember, Jesus was nailed to a lump of wood. When he was nailed onto this lump of wood, they held up a hyssop branch to this royal king. The scarlet yarn represents royalty. Jesus is nailed to a lump of wood. He is this royal king of the Jews. And they hold up this sponge to him on the branch of a hyssop. Anyway, you go on, there's all this like detail and detail. He's sacrificed outside of the camp. And it's such an intricate picture. Jesus is saying, he's sending a message to this leper that was once an outcast. Do you know what? You're clean. A couple of years ago, one of my daughters was studying at the Royal Drawing School, right? And she basically was asked to, along with a couple of students, to go to Buckingham Palace. And she went to this kind of party thing. It was like a charity. And she was there with her sketchbook and a pen and paper. And she was asked, as part of the evening's entertainment, to sketch these Versace supermodels who were there in ball gowns on tables, and she was there with her sketchbook. And literally she had the likes of like Demi Moore and all these A-listers that were sort of swanning around watching her drawing and stuff like that. Now imagine I turned up at Buckingham Palace and I tapped on the door and I said, listen, I've got my pen and my paper. I would like to come in and draw a couple of supermodels, if that's all right. And then you can imagine saying, come in, Mr. Head, yes. And then they sit me down and I say, all right, Prince Charles. And there's all these, all right, Demi. And I'm there sketching away. That wouldn't happen. Why wouldn't it happen? Well, there's several reasons why that wouldn't happen. But Ruby was allowed in. Why? Is she a better artist than me? It's debatable. But the reason she was allowed in was because she was invited in. It's Charles's palace. He says who's allowed in and who ain't. She was allowed in because of who she knew. When we look at this story, we see that the context it's written in, we see that Jesus heals this leper. This leper would not even have been allowed into the temple. There was an outer wall in the temple where people came to worship God. He would not have been allowed past that wall because he was a leper, he was unclean, he was an outsider. After this, right, in Matthew's account, he then goes on to heal this centurion's servant. Right, now what's significant about this centurion is the fact that he's a Gentile. Okay? Gentiles were not allowed in to worship in God's temple. There was another thing. After that, we read that Jesus then heals Peter's mother-in-law, a woman. Okay, so if you were with me 2,000 years ago and we were to see what was going on and what Matthew was saying, The temple itself, it had the outer wall. The leper could go to the outer wall, he could go further. The centurion, however, could go through the wall into the courts of the Gentile. There was a big sort of Solomon's colonnade inside the temple. The woman, however, could go beyond that into the next court that was called the woman's court. What Jesus is doing is he is bringing people into the presence of God from the outside in. Do you get this? This gives me goose pimples when you think about it, because actually what's happening is there's restrictions on these various people, and then you realise who it is that wrote this. This is Matthew. Matthew the tax collector. Matthew the one that was called by God. God called this outsider to come and encounter God. When Jesus heals the leper, he says, listen, you can come in. When Jesus heals the Gentile, he says, you can come in. When he heals this woman, Peter's mother-in-law, he says, you can come in. Listen, Jesus sees and sends a message to the priest saying, do you know what? This ain't your temple. It's mine. I'll say who's allowed in. I'll say who's shut out and who's allowed in. I'm going to finish with this verse. It says this in Hebrews 13. It says, the high priest carries the blood of the animals into the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burnt outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gates to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. You see, when Jesus was sending a message to the priest, he's saying, I see you. I see. He saw more than just an ostracised leper. He saw an opportunity to reveal the fact. When Jesus died on the cross outside the city, it says that at the moment of his death, that the curtain was torn from top to bottom. That dividing wall, that wall of separation, that physical barrier was torn at Jesus' death. He's saying, you're allowed in. You're allowed in. It may be that you're here and you feel like an outsider. You feel unclean. You feel like, and if you knew what I was really like, and you look round and you see people, they obviously know each other, they look like they're all together. Listen, my privilege, I say it a lot, from the front is I know a lot of the stories in this room. Nobody's sorted out. Everyone's unclean. Everyone at one point has been outside. Jesus has come and he sees you. You want to be clean? You really want to know what it is to be clean? I was with a friend last night and he was telling me a story about how he came to Jesus and he had this dream and these bolts of light came and impacted him. 7 times he saw it in a dream and it hit him in the chest. He says he woke up in the morning and he was clean. He felt clean. All the rubbish and the sin and the crime that he'd done before was clean. You want to feel that? Do you want to know that your sins are forgiven, that your price is paid? Jesus Christ went to the cross outside the camp. Imagine the leper looking up as one of the birds was dripping blood over the thing and the other was set free. Today we're going to take the bread and the wine. And just as the symbol of the dove being released and one of them dying sort of pictured the fact that there was this great exchange, your sin put on the innocent one so that you could fly free. Today we remember with the bread and the wine that Jesus' body was broken and his blood was shed so that ours don't have to be. I'm going to pray and then I'm going to hand over to Fraser. Jesus, I so thank you that you didn't come to start off a religion. You didn't come with like loads of clever teaching and stuff. You came and you brought dignity to the outsiders. And Lord, we come to you as those that were outsiders. And we want, as it were, to come to the priests and to offer the sacrifice that you told us to come and bring. And we say, Jesus, you clean us up. You take our guilt, our shame, our sin, and I thank you that because of your broken body and your shed blood, that the curtain is torn for us to not only come through the walls and into the Gentile court and into the women's court, but we can come right in, face to face, into the presence of God, because we are cleansed through your blood shed for us. We love you, Jesus. We worship you, Jesus. We're grateful, Jesus. Amen.